Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're doing something specific. We're digging into just 72 hours, September 26th through the 28th, 2025. It was a really intense window. Our sources point to it as this sort of confluence of domestic constitutional fights and, well, global crises heating up. We want to cut through all that noise and give you the key insights.
Exactly. This period, it was just incredibly volatile. And if you want a shortcut to understanding the big strategic battles shaping policy now, things like federal power limits here at home or shifting economic alliances globally.
Yeah.
Well, the events packed into these 3 days, they give you all the critical data points you need.
Okay, so let's unpack it. We've got three big themes, right? All interconnected. First, these constitutional crises, the power struggles within the U.S. Second, the global conflicts really escalating and the trade tensions bubbling underneath. And third, these major economic and cyber risks that are clearly, systemic now. Requires government stepping in. Let's start at home. Federalism right on the line.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is how fast these abstract arguments about authority, how fast they turn into real, high-stakes court battles. We saw the whole Portland versus the feds thing flare up again. It's been simmering for a decade. But this time
it was different.
Yeah, very specific, pretty aggressive deployment order came down.
Right. That was September 27th, 28th. President Trump orders federal troops into Portland. The specific task was protecting ICE facilities. And the order included authorization to use, quote, full force if needed. That's not just talk, that's mobilization.
And Oregon didn't wait. They went straight to court. Legal action. The state sued the president, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, their argument. Massive federal overreach, violating state sovereignty. And it wasn't just rhetoric because the Pentagon actually moved. They put 200 Oregon National Guard troops under federal control for this deployment.
Which just blows up the constitutional question, right? When the federal government grabs control of state assets, like the Guard, for domestic security, where's the line? It feels like we're watching the whole Insurrection Act debate play out live, but through lawsuit.
And the politics of it are pretty telling. Portland's own city leaders were questioning if it was even necessary. They pointed to data, source material showing violent crime was actually dropping in the city that quarter.
Falling. Really?
Falling. Which suggests maybe the main driver wasn't just public safety. Maybe it was more about political leverage, optics, pushing back against a city run by Democrats.
That idea, political leverage, it ties straight into the budget, doesn't it? We were staring down the barrel of October 1st, the fiscal deadline, and the shutdown risk was huge, a totally self-inflicted crisis.
And this particular standoff, it felt heavier because, the GOP had the White House, they had both chambers of Congress, but Democrats still held real leverage in the Senate.
That's the key point, I think. How did they have leverage as the minority?
It's the mechanics, right? The Senate rules. Almost all spending bills need 60 votes to beat a filibuster. The GOP didn't have 60 votes. So the Democratic minority could block things, and they did. It forced negotiation on their terms.
So it wasn't just about spending levels. The fight got really hard-nosed over specific political issues, like Obamacare subsidies.
Exactly. Highly charged stuff.
Yeah.
And agencies, they had to prep, making detailed contingency plans, planning for mass layoffs, the whole federal system bracing for impact, and the GOP pushing for just a short-term fix, a stopgap bill only through November 21st.
Kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, it shows they were just trying to buy time, hoping the political winds might shift later.
And meanwhile, both sides are positioning, right? Trying to make sure the other party gets blamed if things shut down.
It just shows how polarized things are. These deadlines, they're completely weaponized now.
Okay, let's link these power struggles to the justice system now. There were two big developments that kind of touch on this theme of executive power versus the rule of law.
First, the Comey indictment, late September. That was dramatic.
Former FBI Director James Comey, indicted, multiple counts, false statements, obstructing Congress, tied to his testimony, handling classified stuff. I mean, that's huge.
It is, and the way it was framed immediately split everyone. The Justice Department put out a statement, said specifically the case was based on evidence found at President Trump's direction.
So supporters say, okay, this is accountability, finally. But critics jump on that DOJ statement, saying, look, this is political payback against the guy who investigated Trump. How does that damage trust in the DOJ being independent?
Well, it creates this lens, right, where every prosecution, especially involving someone from a past administration, gets viewed as potential political revenge, not partial justice. That's cynicism. That's a really deep, long-term problem for the system.
And talking about power used in, let's say, less transparent ways, the Supreme Court's shadow docket. On September 26th, the court issued an emergency stay. It let the Trump administration keep billions in foreign aid frozen, reversed a lower court.
This might be one of the most consequential things from those 72 hours because it hits the separation of powers, the shadow docket. It's these emergency rulings. They happen fast, sometimes overnight, often with very little explanation, no full public argument.
And the speed is the point.
Absolutely. It let the White House immediately block money Congress had already approved, basically sidestepping Congress's power of the purse. Justice Kagan wrote a really strong dissent on this one, questioning using this quick, less scrutinized process for such a big constitutional issue blocking funds Congress already allocated. It really foreshadows some deep fights over who actually controls the money when things are tied up in court.
Okay, before we pivot globally, we should touch on the immigration flashpoints. These ground the abstract power debates in, well, human reality.
Yeah, we saw that ICE agent suspended in New York. Video surfaced of him shoving a mother in front of her kids. That kind of incident, it just pours fuel on the national fire about enforcement tactics.
And then, completely separate but equally tragic, the violence in detention. A gunman at the Dallas ICE facility shot detainees, killed one, injured two others, then was found dead. Authorities stressed no ICE agents were hurt, but still. It throws a harsh spotlight back onto safety and conditions inside those centers.
Yeah, heavy stuff.
Okay, let's shift gears. While the U.S. was tied up in these internal knots, the global stage was just as unstable, maybe more so. Let's look at the conflicts that trade stuff.
Ukraine saw a major escalation. September 28th, Russia launched one of its biggest combined attacks in months. Sources mentioned a huge number, like 593 drones, 50 missiles, targeting Kyiv, other areas.
Wow, that scale. 593 drones. That sounds like a tactical shift. Just trying to overwhelm defenses with sheer numbers.
Seems like it. Damaging energy infrastructure, causing blackouts, trying to break civilian capacity.
And the ripple effects. NATO territory.
Immediately, Poland summoned Russia's ambassador. Reports of Russian incursions near their border, which raises that constant, tricky question for NATO. What counts as an attack? What's the threshold for triggering Article 5, collective defense?
And you connect that to the UN General Assembly happening around the same time. Russia's foreign minister warning NATO directly, don't get more involved in Ukraine. It felt like a deliberate poke, testing NATO's resolve.
Definitely heightened rhetoric.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Gaza was presenting this bizarre diplomatic picture. On September 27th, Israeli strikes killed at least 59 people, so brutal escalation on the ground. But on the same day, President Trump announces, quote, a deal to end the war in Gaza is near, after high-level talks.
That's whiplash. Intense fighting and a promise of imminent peace side by side. And then you had Prime Minister Netanyahu at the UN vowing to finish the job against Hamas, prompting walkouts.
Right. Diplomatic theater, but with real consequences. And that public reaction wasn't just at the UN. Huge protest in Berlin. Tens of thousands demanding a ceasefire. It shows deep public divisions in key allies like Germany. Leaders there feel that pressure.
Now let's layer in the economic friction. Trade wars. The U.S. slapped new tariffs on things in late September. Drugs, trucks, furniture imports. Pretty sweeping.
And the reaction from business, from economists, overwhelmingly negative. Mostly because it felt like adding fuel to the inflation fire. Plus the warnings about retaliation.
Yeah, other countries hitting back with their own tariffs on U.S. goods.
Exactly. The administration argued it was needed, rebalance trade, help domestic industry. But critics saw it as just more protectionism, adding instability to supply chains that were already stressed.
And quickly, other global hotspots mentioned in the sources?
Venezuela. Reports that the U.S. was prepping military options, airstrikes even, in response to Maduro's crackdowns.
And then that drone attack on an international aid flotilla around September 24th, that led to Spain and Italy sending warships to protect the remaining aid ships.
Which is a serious development.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder about the safety of humanitarian corridors going forward.
Okay, final section. Let's hit economic shifts, cyber shocks, and some key local news with bigger implications, starting with oil.
Two big signals on oil in these 72 hours. First, OPEC Plus reportedly thinking about boosting output in November. That would be a shift, right? After months of holding back supply, markets saw it as potentially cooling prices down the road.
And the second signal, something about Iraq and Turkey.
Yeah, this is a bit technical but important geopolitically. Iraq resumed exporting Kurdish oil through Turkey, the Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline. It had been shut down for 2.5 years, since March 2023.
Why does restarting that specific pipeline matter so much?
Well, the shutdown put huge financial strain on Iraq's Kurdish region. Getting that oil flowing again initially about 180,000 barrels a day eases their budget crisis. And it adds more supply to the global market, which fits with OPEC, plus maybe easing up too. It suggests some successful backroom diplomacy managed to unlock those flows. Good for regional stability, potentially.
Okay, now this cyber risk piece. This feels like a turning point. Cyber risk being treated explicitly as a systemic economic threat, requiring government bailouts.
The UK example is textbook. Jaguar Land Rover, JLR. They got hit by a cyber attack in late August, forced a production halt for nearly a month. So the UK government steps in with a $1.5 billion, that's like $2 billion loan guarantee through their export finance agency.
A loan guarantee isn't free money, but it's major support, aimed at stabilizing JLR because it's seen as critical industry. And that immediately sparked the moral hazard debate, right?
Exactly. Does bailing out JLR just encourage other big companies to skimp on cybersecurity because they figure the government will save them if they're too big to fail? That's the moral hazard argument. But the counter is the risk to the UK's whole manufacturing base if JLR collapsed. It was seen as too high. The government basically treated the cyber attack like a natural disaster, needing national economic intervention.
And the personal cost. Cybersecurity isn't just about big companies. That breach at the Keto International Nurseries in London. Hackers stealing data on 8,000 kids, names, photos, addresses, family contacts.
And then starting to post samples online. That's terrifying. Hits child safety alarms hard. Shows cyber warfare targeting the most vulnerable data.
Okay, almost done. Quick hits on local news with broader resonance. New York City politics.
Big shakeup. Mayor Eric Adams dropped his re-election bid, September 28th. Said he lost public matching funds.
Which just blows the race wide open instantly. Sets up a completely new dynamic. The Democratic nominee, Zoran Mamdani, versus independent Andrew Cuomo, the former governor, plus Republican Curtis Sliwa.
Yeah, guarantees a whole new, probably chaotic, debate about the city's future. Housing, crime, all of it.
And sadly, we have to note the drumbeat of U.S. gun violence continued. 2 mass shootings reported between the 27th and 28th. Michigan Church, North Carolina bar.
Which inevitably reignited the whole debate.
Again. Environmentally, there was that M5.9 quake off Oregon, a reminder for the Pacific Northwest about the Cascadia Zone risk. Plus, Tropical Storm Imelda forming near the Bahamas, threatening the southeast U.S., and deadly flash floods in Arizona. 4 dead reported there.
But let's end on a positive note. A public health win. Pakistan. Authorities managed to vaccinate 9 million adolescent girls against HPV, despite significant opposition misinformation campaigns. That's a huge achievement.
Okay, so let's pull back, zoom out. These 72 hours in late September, they were packed with immediate high-stakes choices. Federal troop deployments, the Supreme Court's shadow docket move, the government funding ticking clock, massive drone attacks in Ukraine, that JLR cyber bailout setting a precedent.
Yeah, understanding how all these crises intersect. The erosion of checks and balances here, the global conflict spreading, the fragility exposed by cyber threats. It's really essential if you want to navigate what's coming next in 2025. It honestly feels like every major institution, domestic and global, got pushed almost to a breaking point in just those 3 days.
And that leads us to our final thought, something for you, the listener, to chew on based on all this. You have these simultaneous struggles, right? Constitutional battles at home Portland, the foreign aid freeze via the shadow docket, and at the same time, these intense global flashpoints, Ukraine, Gaza, Venezuela. So what's the single most pressing long-term threat to global stability that these 72 hours revealed? Is it the breakdown of international law and norms we see in these conflicts? Or is it maybe the faster erosion of checks and balances and trust right here at home? Something to think about.